You're listening to the Caramel Apples Podcast, a podcast that dials up thoughtful, heartwarming nostalgia of all things great and retro and the golden era of pop culture and beyond. I'm Kennedy Rizzo.
And I'm Cooper Lee.
We are shameless Gen Xers super fans of the iconic 70s and 80s, where from a front row seat perspective, those awesome decades were full of weird and wonderful fads, trends, and crazes gone far too soon. So come along as we launch into our fascinating discussion this week about Tears for Fears. When we think of many notable aspects of the 80s, you cannot not talk about at length of all the wonderful, memorable bands and nostalgic music. Like, you cannot not talk about Tears for Fears, right, Coop?
I have to say, you are absolutely correct.
Of course I am.
You said it. My goodness. Yes. Tears for Fears is literally the quintessential 80s entity. Seriously. And I'm so glad that we are going over them and some of their many chart topping hits.
Oh, yeah.
So since we were children of the 80s, we remember most some of their biggest chart toppers from the mid 80s. And those songs will be mostly what we're covering this week.
Yes, Coop. Like you, I'm excited. And as I know you are to launch into this Orchard Retro Trek this week.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's not waste any time. Let's get to it.
Okay.
So, most of our musical consideration of Tears for Fears, will mostly be on the album we're most familiar with, and that's of The Big Chair.
Mm.
So, those songs, Coop, oh, like really, they were so surreal, ethereal sounding,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
and most memorable. But, you know, where do we start? Like, we'll just get into that in a moment, right? Oh,
Yes, can't wait. This will be a most exciting Orchard Retro Trek this week.
yes.
So let's get into it. So, Tears for Fears are an English pop rock band which came together in Bath, England. England in the year 1981.
Oh, see, already that's totally awesome and totally 80s.
It is. Band members consisted of Roland Orzabal and Kurt Smith. Fun fact: Tears for Fears was founded after discussion of their first previous band described as the mod influenced graduate.
Oh, now that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Did not know that.
Yeah, no, right.
So these guys apparently have been musically inclined for a while.
Truly, Kennard. Tears for Fears was initially associated with the very early 80s new wave synthesizer bands from back then.
The new wave power duo shot to the top of the pop charts with a pair of our favorite songs on the Billboard Hot 100 number one hits in the year 1985.
Ah,
Those songs were the ever awesome, ever familiar 80s anthems. Shout.
yes.
And Everybody Wants to Rule the World.
Oh, that's so true, Kennard. The Greatest Hits album includes all of the other nostalgic tracks you'd pine to hear possibly on repeat, which people that know us most would not be a bit surprised at that revelation, would they?
No, they wouldn't. We're a little bad about that. Proudly bad. That's okay, though.
Yes, absolutely.
We have the Tears for Fears album songs from The Big Chair that came out by Mercury Records in 1999. Totally love this album because it does have so many of our favorite song of theirs on there.
All right, right.
Yeah, including 7 bonus tracks that are pretty good. 2 of them, one in particular, is the titular song from the actual album, The Big Chair. I really like the one called Empire Building.
Mm.
That has a beautiful sound to it. It's almost dystopian type. It has that
Ah,
sound.
nice. That's kind of what Tears for Fears is known for. Like their sound signature, if you will. Their sound is otherworldly, fantastical, and strangely different.
Yeah, and we were always kind of drawn to that. Like we were young,
Hmm. Hmm.
but we were always drawn to that really edgy, weird, kind of different sound of things.
Yeah.
And if I remember correctly, I think it was in the summer of 1985.
Hmm.
Um, our mom took us to because we were always about swimming and stuff. But one time, this was just a day, it was really hot, and our mom decided to take us to the theater to see Return to Oz.
Yeah. I remember that
Hmm.
one.
I can't remember what the little Russian actress's name is. It was I can see her. I don't know. She's been in some other stuff as a grown up, but she was the little girl that played Dorothy in it.
Yes.
And like the Oz characters, the Scarecrow, they had a Tin Man, they had all that. They had some really strange creatures in the movie,
Yes, they did.
but Everybody Wants to Rule the World was huge at that time, and like it was blasting out of the radio constantly.
Isn't
And
that crazy?
yeah, and I remember being in the car hearing that song going and coming from the theater.
Oh, hey, that's awesome.
In my mind, I feel like it's almost like the unofficial soundtrack, we assigned to it, to that movie,
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
the movie had its weird elements about it, and then you had that ethereal sound of the song.
Right.
I mean, it's like it was like hand in glove. I mean, it just was totally etched into my mind like that. What do you think?
I think, you know what? I completely understand what you're talking about because I think that's how a lot of things get cemented in your mind.
Yes. Yeah.
Sometimes a movie is made in your mind just because of the memories that are connected to the song that is taking place at said memorable moments.
Word.
So yeah, I totally get what you're saying. Other people might not understand what we're saying, but I get what you're saying.
It probably helps that you're my sister too.
It works, so doesn't
Yep.
it? And speaking of their unique sound, it's very interesting and no accident that much of Tears for Fears' early work emerged from their shared interest in, get this, psychology.
Hmm. That thought is very interesting, and it's making much better sense of the origins and inner workings of how their edgy and dystopian like sound started becoming more pronounced as they move forward.
Hmm.
Tears for Fears, their backstory, ugh, it's one of the pop rock's most interesting soap operas for reals.
And as you generally say, Kennard, facts. Oh, and some of that major contribution connected to Tears for Fears' signature sound, their style came from the hard knocks in early life and family.
True. It is said that Roland Orzabal's experience of primal therapy he received while tender in years,
Hmm.
that was a result of his trying to cope with some traumatic life occurrences, which was his parents' separation, which then had him living with a difficult housebound father.
Mm.
Yeah. And as a side note, childhood trauma in any form is tragic, and it's a really unfortunate state of being for so many when considering their toxic early experiences in life or in the family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Whether intentional or unintentional, these harsh experiences can really break or damage a person in their formative years. Lasting damage can literally take years to make sense of and such.
True. Very, very true. Um, and each week we go on and on about how good things were in life back in the 70s and 80s here on our podcast.
Hmm.
That's really due to the fact that we actually were so very fortunate that we had a good childhood growing up, with two very wonderful parents committed to both each other and their willful responsibility to, raise us kids as best as they could.
Yep. Hmm.
They were figuring this out too. Um, And I think sometimes when we're recounting so much of our memories from the past, through various means, we do tend to forget that not everyone, many have had such a warm, fuzzy springboard in life in which to fondly reflect on.
That's such a raw and valid point, Cooper. And we really were fortunate in in that area, but
Yeah, yeah.
peering into the backstory of what both Roland and Kurt of Tears for Fears went through in life so early on, their very real experiences of having to make some sense on why and how they weren't getting the basics they desperately needed in life, such as love, support, and understanding.
Hmm.
A warm bond with family and friends, that was kind of elusive for them.
Yeah.
And it's sad to have discovered this about them. That really opens up and expands the question of really how many more of these cases really ravaged or stunted someone's view of others and the world they live in.
Yeah, yeah. And it would be so hard to work through,
Hmm.
but very possible as countless people utilizing countless ways to get the needed help in order to not only cope, but to eventually thrive.
Hmm.
Honestly, the hurts and emotional, maybe even physical scars will no doubt always be there, coming back odd and inopportune times, to remind one of the type of lasting pain.
Hmm.
It's so sad and damaging. And our caramel apple hearts go out to any and all that have these types of tragic memories.
That's true. And back then when you were having troubles, I don't know, like, I don't know, everybody was a little bit more private about that kind of stuff. Like sometimes you didn't know somebody was struggling.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Like now things are really opened up compared to what it was. So things like this were kind of taboo even.
Yeah. Yeah. Because people would be like socially marked for
Yeah.
things like this, like
Yes.
that's your problem. But it's like, no, it's kind of everyone's problem.
Yeah. Well, your
Yeah.
your tribute from us to them, that was sweet, Coop. I think that's sweet.
I thank you.
And it really is our fervent hope that many ones with this type of past memory attached to your life story, like Coop says, we see you and we know that there are many of you out there carrying this underlying pain, but it really is our hope that you can find some sort of peace and comfort as you travel through life and make sense of things from the day to day.
Hmm.
Maybe even some having some fun with our retro pop culture topics we cover here on our podcast. So, we're always trying to find a way to put smiles not only on our faces, but on our listeners as well, warm your
Yeah.
heart.
Yeah. Yeah.
But back to our subject, we're done with all the violins and all that. So, um, back to the guys in Tears for Fears. They got creative in how to process this type of childhood confusion and pain. And that's where they turn to their creative side with music, thankfully for us.
Yeah, we're so glad. Both Roland Orzabal and Kurt Smith had rough childhoods and ended being council estate boys, which I believe may be the English equivalent to what orphanages and foster care is here in the States.
Oh,
Yeah, this is where the guys meet and grow up together in Bath, England. This is also where their shared love and interest in psychology and all things cerebral began to gel.
which as Tears for Fears blossom into the iconic band they became, there was definitely audibly discernible proof in the music they wrote and performed.
Yes, let's see. Some of our very favorite chart toppers definitely had that sound, that interestingly strange sound that may have been tantamount to the deeply buried frustration, anger, and pain both members of Tears for Fears may have experienced. We'll get into more detail of these nostalgic chart toppers here momentarily, but their music was hands down so inspiring and, for lack of a better word, haunting.
This is true for
Mhm.
there, there were as kids a couple of movies back when we remembered. We had already mentioned the one just a second ago that we referenced was Return to Oz.
Mhm.
And then the other one brought to mind regarding one of their songs was that retro film Dark Crystal.
Ah, yes. Both very unique and fantastical movies that were way cool and memorable in their own right. But becoming more familiar with those two movies, along with the backdrop of the otherworldly sounding Tears for Fears song,
Oh,
can we say epic?
epic. And as we said before, it's sort of like we placed and made our own personal soundtracks of sorts for those two films that already opened up our imaginations wide, and made them that much more fascinating and surreal to us.
It sure did. Uh, and these guys, Tears for Fears, have to be one of the most influential group that few remember of any musical era.
Yeah.
I mean, you just referenced this and how their sound and influence impacted us, and we were kids still then.
You said it, Goop. So, and if the listeners don't understand why we're being so funny about that point, it's like that's how good their music was.
Yeah,
It moved people. You heard it. It caused your imaginations to explode.
absolutely.
It was that powerful. And the totally tubular 80s would not have been the same without them.
Mhm.
Powerhouse rockin' tunes, that Tear for Fears, buddy.
They most certainly were a huge part of nostalgic goodness, but Kennard, I've got something to share that may just surprise both you and our listeners.
Oh, really?
Yes. So, having said that, with all of that raging, wonderful 80s pop sound and global charted success after success blasting out of our radio speakers, did you know that Tears for Fears, or better yet, Roland and Kurt, never really got along?
Hold up. Are you serious, Coop?
Mhm. Yes, I'm quite serious.
Are you being for real?
Yes.
Oh, wow. That's a bit of a shocker.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, because like come on, Tears for Fears, not even just them, the band, if you will,
Yeah.
it just worked.
Yeah.
Tears for Fears was the business, yo.
And even though they'd had a long, solid history together with less than desirable backgrounds, even in the height of Tears for Fears fame,
Yeah.
the two bandmates unfortunately had to constantly work on personal struggles, as well as having very differences of opinion on creative vision the band needed to take into serious account over the years.
Wow. Just wow.
Mm.
I mean, they did a decent enough job concealing this disturbing and upsetting riff and all, but
Yeah.
despite the chart toppers dominating during that time, those hits still emerged and they came fast and steady.
Yeah, and in some interviews they've given over the years, the guys actually have been quite candid about this occurrence, which some very honest statements explaining some things a little better.
Okay.
Roland Orzabal stated, and I quote, "I think we would pretty much fall out every tour because we were in each other's spaces.
Uh oh.
Yeah, I think we were different personalities then, and we had different roles. Because from the moment we went on top of the Pops in 1982, Kurt became a pop star, and I didn't really get my head around it. It took me 3 to 4 years, maybe even longer, to embrace that side and become one of the main singers, then the main singer." End quote.
Wow.
Yeah. Band member Kurt Smith adds, and I quote, "We were kind of similar when we were young. We're both middle sons of three boys, brought up pretty much by our mothers. We had shared ambitions, goals, all the rest of it." End quote. Insecurities both of them may have had.
Yeah, that sounds like some deep underlying stuff.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Hmm.
I do find it interesting how they were walking us through their experience and about what their dynamic was, even in the earliest days of their friendship.
Yeah, I agree. Quite candid, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And Kurt goes on into sharing more intel with, and I quote, "But after some of those goals were achieved, the way they affected us was completely different. We are completely different characters. I think you can tell that just by talking to us, albeit separately. It's because we end up talking over each other, and you're not going to get the best of us, end quote.
I think that, especially with a bad day for some people, that's one of those things that kind of easily makes people's eye twitch.
Oh, yes, yes. Those toes get awful sore, don't they?
That's funny, though. I mean, we're not trying to make fun, but that is kind
No.
of funny.
Yes.
But I think it's good to highlight these telling quotes, as you said, from the bandmates. Now we're getting to know who Tears for Fears are behind the cool music.
Sure.
Because hearing the transparency really opens up a scope to hear them reveal the real raw details and feelings behind their personal and professional struggles.
Hmm.
And although it's both interesting and eye opening that Tears for Fears had some definite underlying issues they've shared here and there with us, the public, they really weren't the first or the last band or group that has struggled over a number of issues over the years.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, because even these entities eventually parting ways because they cannot come to any agreement to keep said band's peace. That just to keep performing. We've heard
Yeah.
story after story of like numerous bands that you're like, you thought things were cool,
Right.
and then they were disbanded. They broke up.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when that happens, I mean, I don't know, it's one of the most disappointing outcomes for many a loyal fan because our favorite groups that we know and love, they give up and call it quits.
I know, right? Yeah. Tears for Fears were awesome. And we're so glad that they were able to give their most loyal fans some clear proof of their talent and dedication to their craft, despite the underlying friction that existed within the band. Like what you hear so far? Make sure you never miss a show by clicking the subscribe button now. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. Thank you for your support. Now, back to the show.
And sadly, this type of situation can start to lead to burnout.
Mm.
But before we get into that portion of Tears for Fears' experience, let's get into some of their fascinating work and career highlights, shall we?
Yes, I am so ready to dive into this.
Oh, me too. Great. So, again, most of our discussion of their memorable music will take place mainly in our designated time parameters. The 80s from back to when we were kids.
Yay!
And I second that, yay, Coop.
Okay. So, Tears for Fears' debut album from 1983, entitled The Hurting, it reached number one on the UK albums chart. Then comes their second album, and our favorite and most familiar songs from the Big Chair in 1985.
Woo!
Yeah, yeah, streamers, balloons, confetti all around. It reached number one on the US Billboard Hot 200, gaining multi platinum status both in the UK as well as here in the US. Love so much of the songs from the Big Chair.
Sure did, Coop. Oh, songs from the Big Chair album contain two Billboard Hot 100 number one hits, that being Shout and the earlier aforementioned hit Everybody Wants to Rule the World.
Mhm.
Everybody Wants to Rule the World won the Brit Award for Best British Single in 1986. Very impressive, and we aren't a bit surprised.
So, not surprised at all, are we, Kennedy?
No.
So, let's talk about Shout for 1 second. Now, we love this song and actually had the 45 to it.
We did.
Mhm. With the ever cool song and bonus track, The Big Chair was on the other side.
Like, we literally wore that record out, didn't we, Coop?
Oh, yes.
And, and do you remember those old school turntables, like the actual record players,
Yes.
where you could change the speed of the recording from 33, 45, and 78?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so we set that up because we love the big chair.
Hmm.
So the big chair was awesome anyway on normal speed. But dude, it was crazy awesome set on that low 33 speed.
Yes.
Epic. Like, look out, get out of the way.
Yes. Awesome doesn't even begin to encapsulate how it sounded.
Facts.
So, Shout was a departure from their earlier works, becoming an easy top 20 hit, top five in the UK to be exact.
Mm.
That was the real start of Tears for Fears' international fame and success.
And as the duo worked together, they drew mad inspiration from various notable 80s artists of that synthwave, new wave sound,
Hmm. Hmm.
which helped Roland Orzabal develop a fondness for synthesizers as a result of the early 80s electronic explosion becoming a thing. So remember the very 80s song Cars by Gary Newman?
Yes. So fun fact. Uh, the duo wasn't always called Tears for Fears.
Oh, explain.
Hmm. Probably true to their earlier childhood and life struggles. Did you know that they first called themselves History of Headaches?
Really
Yes, then to Tears for Fears.
interesting.
Yes, so fun fact, their name was inspired by, as we mentioned at the outset of our show today, primal therapy developed by American psychologist Arthur Janov.
Okay, so psychologist Arthur Janov also had another world famous patient, that of John Lennon back in the 70s.
Mhm.
Obviously, just these two mega powerhouse celebrities, no doubt, helped this psychologist gain tremendous publicity.
Oh, yeah.
So, just a quick side note on that, as we dig into the foundation and huge fuel contributor in these powerhouses' amazing craft and talent.
Yeah. So songs from the big chair had a more sophisticated sound that would become the band's stylistic hallmark.
Hmm.
This development caused this particular album becoming one of the biggest sellers worldwide.
Not surprised.
Not at all. Boasting a certified triple platinum in the UK, as well as a quintuple. Yes, quintuple platinum here in the US in 1985.
That's crazy. But again, not surprised.
Not at all. Not at all.
And it remained the number one album for 5 weeks the summer of that same year, 85.
Ooh. So now with that backdrop of success, I've got an interesting fun fact to share.
Okay.
Fun fact. Songs from the Big Chair was actually inspired by the book and TV miniseries Sybil, which was a riveting account of a young woman with DID, or dissociative identity disorder. It is said that Sybil sought refuge in her therapist, Big Chair.
See, now that's interesting. That gets my attention.
Uh huh. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. So, Tears for Fears, reflecting on their work connected to the big chair, felt that each of the album's songs had a very specific, distinctive personality of its own.
That's so true, Kennard. You can hear this in any given song of theirs.
You can. So, some of their other famous tracks of Tears for Fears that are favorites are Shout,
Mm-hmm.
Everybody Wants to Rule the World,
Mm-hmm.
and we got Head Over Heels. That's a cool one.
Yes.
The actual cut, The Big Chair, which we just talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's some less familiar ones on the whole. Like those were the ones that you'd heard more often than not coming out of the radio waves.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But then there's a couple other ones like Listen, Mother's Talk, and then
Mm.
Empire Building.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And to reiterate, Roland and Kurt were struggling to see eye to eye and work smoothly together on a personal rapport, as they were hard at producing and promoting the many songs that we know and love.
And not minding hearing over and over again, thanks to that repeat gene our ornery mama so lovingly passed on to us.
She did. She gave us double portions, triple portions.
She's too kind.
Yes, don't let us like something, we will run it in the ground.
We will.
And we hope people do that with our podcast.
That's it. We give you solid permission.
Yes.
But in February 1986, Tears for Fears finished a lengthy and, dare we say, an exhausting world tour promoting the big chair.
Mm.
The duo was then honored at the 1986 Brit Awards in London, where they won the Best British Single Award for Everybody Wants to Rule the World.
Tears for Fears was also nominated for Best British Group and Best British Album that same year.
Well, all of the while, Tears for Fears forged forward in maintaining a level of cohesiveness among themselves as they continued to make music.
Mm.
Tears for Fears released a third album, The Seeds of Love, in 1989 and had wonderful success with it, for it became platinum selling. But soon after that, the tensions got to be way too much.
Ah.
Yeah, so by 1991, the duo had all they could take and had an acrimonious split. Oh no.
Oh no, is right.
Yeah, we spoke about this a few minutes ago. Don't do that to the fans. Yeah, think about your fans.
That's right.
But I think Roland said of their dynamic, and I quote, "I think we would pretty much fall out every tour because we were in each other's faces," end quote. So they weren't kidding.
Yeah, I mean, literally, what other choices do you have? You're the band, you're the group. So obviously you're going to be in close quarters, probably eating together.
Oh
Same
yeah.
yeah, same bus, yeah.
Yeah. It's best to part ways amicably. Well, they say acrimonious, so they weren't exactly wanting to skip down the street together, but it was better than them becoming the evening news. I don't know.
Right. Yes, yes. You take your leave when you see fit. It's probably better for all parties involved.
Good thinking, guys.
So as you said, oh no, is right. So during this rough hiatus, Roland Orzabal and Kurt Smith went on to continue making music, but on their own, more focusing on solo projects.
Okay.
Roland Orzabal kept creating music under the Tears for Fears brand, releasing a couple of albums entitled Elemental in 1993 and Raul, the Kings of Spain in 1995.
And real quick, Coop, this is again going back to our stupid kid minds. But we can see them, we can visualize Tears for Fears, right?
Sure, absolutely, yeah.
And it was neat. We find out all kinds of amazing, fascinating things about each and every topic we cover here on the podcast.
Yeah, it's always exciting.
It is. And I mean, you're just like your jaws on the floor. It's like, I did not know that.
Yeah.
But when you think about them in their videos and stuff and the sound, you think of Tears for Fears and you see them. I literally, I don't know if you feel the same way. I thought they were fleshly brothers.
I thought so too. Yes, I did.
They look similar to me. They look like they are kin.
They really do. And there's somebody that we personally know. He's like our surrogate nephew that looks like them. He looks like he can be in their family.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, so here they're not connected. He's not connected to them, but they all look alike. So,
so I just had to add that because I really did. I thought they were like fleshly brothers.
Yes, I totally see it.
Well, the fact that they, went on to still try to make music after their split, that's interesting. And for us in our ever 80s loving minds, we're appreciative that they did that, but we miss our duo. We miss Tears for Fears as we knew them.
Yeah.
So we may, and many others may wonder, was Tears for Fears as we remembered, were they done for good?
Well, thankfully, the short answer is no.
Oh, okay, I can breathe now. Great. Okay. Oh, beads of sweat.
Yes, that's good news for us.
Ah!
There's even more backstory as the Tears for Fears saga continues, like some personal tragedies. Roland Orzabal's longtime wife, Carolyn, recently passed away from natural causes.
Oh, that's very sad.
Yeah, I hate sharing that, but
God, boy, those poor guys took a beating, didn't they?
yeah, yeah.
Well, we're happy to share that after their initial split, though, in the early 90s, that they reconvened here and there over the years to eventually make yet another huge comeback, much to all of the die-hard fans' delight.
Yes. After Roland's wife's recent passing, Roland and Kurt had taken part of a major pivotal career shaking phone call between the two.
Oh, really?
Yes. And at that point, the duo hadn't spoken to each other at all. Forget this, 9 years.
Wow, that's a long time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, after they dove into their conversation, they ended up catching each other up on the latest goings on in each other's lives. They actually spoke of and tackled some of the deeper, darker realizations that strained their relationship from the past. But addressing some of the more uncomfortable, touchy aspects of the recent past, something amazing happened, and where they reconnected over pinpointing the shared goals, ambitions, and all the other things that connected them in their early friendship from the past.
Mm-hmm.
But their view of everything had changed for the better, so that was cool.
That's very cool.
Now they were seeing things from a much different perspective after so many years passing by.
Yeah. Yeah. They were seeing things, life, career, for a much more mature standpoint.
Hmm.
Um, Pretty much like we all eventually do.
that's the plan.
Yes, that's like called growing up. And thankfully. So, am I thinking correctly in what you're about to share next, Kennedy?
Well, you know the saying, great minds think alike. So after that pivotal phone call, both Roland Orzabal and Kurt Smith seemed to have made a truce.
Woo, that was close. That was
It
close.
it sure was. So really, to make a long story short, Tears for Fears reconvened together again to make that huge comeback that we stated mere moments ago.
Oh, it's so cool that they both had changed over the years for the better.
Hmm. And that's pretty much what member Kurt Smith alluded to when he stated about their decision to work together again. And I quote, "So it was not so much that we suddenly hit it off again as we realized that we'd both changed, both grown up, and that neither of us was the person we so despised back in the 90s." End quote.
It's so interesting because I mean, you can see it. They remind me because we already said they look like physical brothers.
Uh-huh.
You can so see them like hitting each other, shoving each other like some brothers do. I can totally see that.
And dialing up the infrared, shooting them out of their eyes.
Right. So the quintessential sibling rivalry, I guess.
Gotta make it fun, right?
Yes, yes. But what you just shared was very interesting. I love and so appreciate hearing when ones have that aha moment.
Mm-hmm.
That realization on or that they're a far different person than they were previously due to various life experiences and naturally personal growth.
Yeah,
It's so enlightening.
I agree, Coop. I agree. So we've really unpacked a lot this episode on our Retro Orchard trek for Tears for Fears.
Hmm.
Um, Before we wrap up our fascinating discussion this week, we're happy to note that Tears for Fears officially reconciled in the year 2000 and right from the jump started collaborating and making new material.
Yeah, so fun fact. An example of that with the release of a new album entitled appropriately Everybody Loves a Happy Ending, released in 2004.
Hmm.
Since then, Tears for Fears have toured together on a semi regular basis.
Oh, sounds just like old times again.
Yeah.
So, after spending almost a decade in development, Tears for Fears released their seventh album entitled The Tipping Point, set for release as of now in February 2022.
Woo!
Yeah, that's awesome sauce.
Yeah.
And I believe they're also going on a world tour starting in late spring of 2022. So,
Mm.
no doubt sharing and promoting that new material they've come up with. And most likely, some of our older favorite hits from the recent past will be shared on that tour as well.
Ah, nostalgia. Love it.
Me too.
Kenneth, you can really tell and hear how deep the many struggles were for the duo all through their lives.
Hmm.
Also, through the pointed, very telling titles Tears for Fears, oh so cool but unique sound in their many works is what resonated and dialed up the undeniable loyalty to the fans.
Agreed.
So happy to hear that they're back together, actively doing what Tears for Fears do best.
Oh, well said, Cooper. And it's interesting how, with the duo, with hugely 80s production values, continually create and produce a sound so absolutely massive.
Hmm.
Like it's Tears for Fears, like no other.
Yes. Tears for Fears took us through the 80s, through the amazing adventure of it throughout time. Really, with their unique style, no band ever painted or told a story quite like they did. Their awesome music speaks for itself.
Oh my God, this was an epic episode this week.
Yeah.
So love Tears for Fears.
Mm-hmm.
They really dominated our mixtapes and pop radio waves hardcore back in the 80s. And they continue to fascinate and dominate our retro loving memories even now.
Mm-hmm.
So much so, we just gotta shout, shout, let
Let
it
it
all
all
out.
out.
These are the things I can do without. Come
Come on.
on.
Love what you heard on this week's Orchard Trek? Well, the answer is simple. To tune into future Retro Treks, meet up with us here next week. Same time, same place at the sweet spot. And it would mean the world to us if you could leave us a shiny review and feedback. Spreading the word really is the best way to grow our podcast and explore more iconic memories. Thank you.